All right, now that I have that, the next thing I'd like to do is set up all of these die images. So die image 0 r.drawable.1 images. So now, if I'm referring to 0, that's the one picture. I'm going to end up using this to keep track, to actually set the different pictures so that when I roll, I can change all of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By the way, in the drawable, that's what I've named each of these. So this is 1.png, 2.png, 3.png, so on. Turns out you don't need the PNG part for it to work. Okay, so when I actually click on the roll button, what should happen? Well, the first thing I should do is I should randomly select for all of these buttons a new image for them. So I'm going to pick a random number between 0 and 5 and basically assign it that particular number. It would be a good idea to also save off what each of those dice actually is as well. So I think I'm actually going to have an int array that does that. So in here, if v equals roll, I'm going to walk through each of the different buttons and give it a new image. So for the number of buttons, what I'm going to say is if it is still one of these hot dice, which means that the button state is 0, then I need to go pick a new thing for it. And so I'm going to create a new random variable. I'm going to call it choice. Much in the same way we have in the past, you take a random number, multiply it by the number of possibilities. That'll give you 0 through 5.99999, so on. Cast it as an int, so it chops off the decimal. So now it's 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And now we're going to change the actual button state, or I'm sorry, the die value, the thing that's in here, to be that new number. And then we're going to set the button image to be the image that corresponds with it. So die value for A is now choice. And then buttons is what I named it. A dot, let's see, is it set image? Set image drawable to be the die images corresponding to the choice just made. So actually it's not set image drawable, it's set image resource. There we go. So the resource that you're going to be pulling from is this particular image. So to begin with, let's just see if it actually updates it. So if I do roll, look, new dice, cool. All right, the next thing I need to do is I need to re-enable any dice that are hot dice. So buttons A should also be set enabled to true. Besides this, once I actually roll, I have to choose some dice to actually score. So I should disable the roll and enable the score. So score.set enabled to true. Let's see if I did that right. All right, so I rolled the dice, and now the score button is enabled. And also notice that, oh, I haven't changed the background. So when I actually click on these image buttons, I'm going to need to do something with those. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and do that. So let's see, if it's not one of the top three, I'm going to want to do an else statement on this in order to figure out which button it was. So let me actually put in basically stubs for where I'm going to put in for score, else if b.equals stop. And then finally, I need to go through each of the possible things that is left over, which is each of the image buttons. So now I need to actually walk through the buttons and see which one matches the view. So if e dot equals buttons A, then I'm actually going to do something with it. For now, what I'm going to do is, if it's enabled, that means it's not locked, and so I'm going to switch it from a hot die to a scoring die. So here, what I'm going to say is, so I'm not going to disable it. I'm going to set the background color to color.red. And I also want to change the button state. So button state of A is now a score die. And all of this should only happen if it was originally a hot die. Now if it wasn't, that means it probably is a score die, because otherwise it wouldn't have been enabled. So I'm going to set this back to be light gray and change it back to a hot die. All right, try that out. So now if I roll, these are now enabled. And notice I can select and deselect them. Eventually I'm going to have the scoring part of it. Okay, so if I score, this is the part where I need to actually check and see if it's going to work for each of the possible combinations. The general idea is that I need to check to see if the number of dice selected, if there's any 1s or 5s. And I also need to check for 3 or more of a kind. So I'm basically going to have to walk through all of the currently set score dice and see if it matches one of those patterns. And if you want to end up adding anything else into the Farkle game that you decide to make, you're going to need to change this section here. So the idea with this is I'm going to walk through all the buttons and check for scoring dice. I probably need a count of all of the possible dice that I currently have. So I'm going to do that first. So an int array of, let's see, value counts, I guess. Just keeping track of how many times I've seen the number 1 or the number 2 and so on. I think for convenience sake, so that my numbers actually are 1 through 6, I'm actually going to have 7 and just ignore the 0 spot.